Good evening. My name's Simon Shaw, and we're thrilled to have you here at Sotheby's with us this evening. A special welcome to our guest tonight, the incomparable Tracey Emin. Tracey, I'm thrilled that you're here with us to get stuck into Munch and women. So as we're talking about Munch and women, it seems like Munch's mother is probably a good place to start. So let's have a look at that sculpture here. This is Mother outside the new Munch Museum in the harbour of Oslo. Can you talk to us a bit about this sculpture? Why this subject did you feel was the appropriate one for the museum?
So first of all, I'm never into competitions because I'm afraid of losing or not getting anywhere or feeling humiliated or something. And this isn't a new thing. This has always been like it. But when this competition came up, I couldn't resist it. It was like, for a 9-meter sculpture to stand, in front of the Munch Museum on the jetty. And to me, it was absolutely obvious what it should be. It should be Munch's mother, a mother, the mother, my mother, the mother of all mothers that's welcoming and protecting. And the thing about Munch is I always feel a little bit, not sorry for him, but I always think about like little Munch, that little boy that was so lost his mother, lost his family was all fucked up, his sister, everything. He come from this really educated, wonderful background, yet he was just completely broken before he started. And I thought that it would be so lovely with all his work in this fantastic museum, for his work and for him to be protected by the mother and for her to be there. And so when where it is, you see all these ships and everything and these all coming in across the fjord, and the idea of her there waiting, protecting and looking out to sea and welcoming everybody, to me it seemed perfect. And most of all, my own mum had just not long died, and so this actually is sort of like my mum in my mind. And she's an older woman, she's like 80, over 80 years old, that's why her body's like that. And I just thought it was really good to have this sort of like giant old man of Munch with my mum. I just thought the whole thing for me just made sense. So, and also in the spring, in the summer, there's a really beautiful alpine, sort of not alpine, but kind of flowers and everything, like a meadow, like a Norwegian meadow. And in the winter, it's like harsh snow, ice, and she looks so strong. And actually, I thought I was going to really love it in the summer, but I love it in the winter.
It's become a bit of a shrine, actually. When I was there in the winter, people come and they light candles in front of her, because she's both. She feels in this kind of monumental, you said 9 meters tall, she's a protector, but she also feels very vulnerable. She has a sort of vulnerability about her, but she has more than anything, a human warmth, and this very kind of angular, geometric building, she humanizes it somehow.
Yeah, and I made the little maquette thing. When I applied for the competition, I just wrote this really simple thing: Munch needs a mother, blah, blah, blah. Really simple. I did a drawing of it, I explained it. And then in a shoebox, I wrapped up in bubble wrap a little maquette of this. And apparently when they were going through the applications, when they opened the box and put it on the table, everybody went, oh, and that was it apparently. So but I was so nervous about it, because doing something like this, not just because it's this giant 9-meter lump of bronze, honestly, what was I going to do with it if it goes wrong? It's like, it was in 168 pieces and it had to be brought over by 6 juggernaut lorries and everything, and by sea and water. It was kind of an exciting journey. But the main thing is I had to love it. I had to really love it, because the only thing that's going to just get rid of this is a flood. Nothing else. Volcano, flood, whatever. But it's here forever, long time after we're gone. And I just thought, I've got to really stand by this and really understand what I was doing. And I'm pleased. I still love her.
So go see her. And so that's the beginning. Munch loses his mother at the age of 5. He nearly dies as well as a child. His sister, Sophia, who he's very close to, he loses at the age of 14. So from the outset, there's a kind of connection between love and loss and an abandonment that he grows up with. This picture, incidentally, The Sick Child, this is a painting from 1885, his first masterpiece, really. Another version of this one is the only Munch in a British public collection.
Yeah.
Actually, the father of the owner of this wonderful picture, which we'll get onto over here, Thomas Olsen, gifted The Sick Child to the Tate in 1939 as a gesture at a moment when German museums were throwing out Munch's work as degenerate under the Nazis, and so he gave it as a gesture, an anti-fascist gesture. No other museum in the UK has one, which is kind of sad, I think.
Really sad.
So let's all encourage Munch's profile, I think, here and elsewhere. So this is The Sick Child, and this kind of sets Munch off on a course that early on in his career, he decides he's going to be painting emotion. He's going to be painting feeling rather than what things look like. And he comes up with this manifesto early on where he says enough pictures of interiors with people sitting and reading and knitting. I'm going to paint real people that feel and breathe and suffer and love, the title of our talk tonight. And that really becomes the grand project of Munch, that he's going to create the journey, which is the modern life of the soul at this moment in the 1890s, where so many roles are being rethought and the world is remaking itself. He's going to chart the journey of the contemporary soul. So more than anything else, the frieze of life, which is his great project, the Scream and Madonna and Vampire and all the great Munch images there, come from this thing called the frieze of life. Which is about life, sex, and death, effectively. It's about the big stuff. But more than anything else, it's about women, and it's about relationships between the sexes. I don't know what you think, Tracey, but it struck me that his art is probably more about women than anything else, actually. More about gender than anything else. What do you think?
Yeah, the other week, someone very stupidly put on Instagram that Munch was such an amazing painter. It's just so unfortunate that he was so sexist and misogynistic. And I come flying to his defense. I said, no. Munch absolutely adored, respected and loved women. And there's all these classics. He put women so high on a pedestal, like almost untouchable. And there's really nice things about all his models and the people who painted them, who he painted. He never fucked them. So most models then...
Oh, he did. Sure, some of them did.
Yeah, but...
Okay,
some of them, right? Some of them, okay. But hey, not all of them, right?
Okay, you can have that.
Yeah, let me have that one. No, what I'm saying is he didn't just presume that the person sitting in front of him that he was painting naked he was going to have sex with. He didn't, and he wasn't like that. And he everybody who worked for him, he treated with real respect and everything. He wasn't just like some sort of posh upper class twat painting pictures of patterns. You know, he really was into people and having empathy and understanding people. And a lot of his emotions were actually quite feminine, and he was very open about them. And there was a kind of fashion at the time to be open about your emotions, your dreams, you know, whether it was Freud, Jung, or any of those kind of that new age of psychology or whatever. But Munch was way ahead of all of that. He was doing it on his own. He was genuinely interested in his own feelings and being open and being emotionally open. Now, this is where me and the whole room and Simon are going to disagree. I think that Munch had a hang up with women because he was homosexual.
We are going to disagree.
Yeah.
Do you really? Tell us about that. What do you... He was described as being very feminine. Everybody talks about, if you were in the same room as him, he was kind of quite feminine in his looks and his presentation.
He scrubbed his hands after painting. He always had really well-groomed nails. I'm not saying that makes you gay, right? But what I am saying is he really, really cared about his appearance. He really cared about all his portraits of himself when he's younger. He's very kind of like, you know, and also when you look at his Munch is really brilliant at painting women, like the big subject of women, and I can't say it, anatomically, he's good at painting women in some quite realistic ways. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty and the sex of it, he was useless. And then when he's drawing men, oh my God, you know, they're like these Adonises, they're standing like this, all proud. You've got all the boy wrestlers, you've got all of this real homoerotic stuff going on in his work again and again and again. And then you have the vampire, the this, the that, the femme fatale, everyone, you know, she tried to kill me, whatever it is. And he sort of really romanticizes women into these, like, you know, the witch, the mother, the lover category. He can't seem to have an ordinary relationship with women because he wasn't actually into women that much. Go on.
Well, and that concludes this evening. So
Yes, okay.
I don't want to say that, but I think that's super interesting. We've got a couple of those images that you mentioned there, so we'll come back to that subject. But I want to take us a little bit on a journey from like his origins through this extraordinary painting here, Dance on the Beach, a painting from 1906, 07, which is a reworking of a painting called The Dance of Life, one of Munch's greatest pictures. It's in the National Gallery in Oslo, that he paints in 1899, comes back to, as he often does, a few years later. This picture, which we're thrilled to be offering at Sotheby's next week, on the subject of women is particularly critical because it includes the two most important romantic relationships of his life. In the center, Munch is dancing, utterly absorbed, in love, oblivious to the world around, with his first lover, Millie Taulov. And flanked either side, white and black, even though they look like different characters, are the same woman, Tulla Larsen, who was probably his greatest love affair. So this picture kind of brings together, I mean, in broad terms, it's an allegory of the cycle of life, white, red, black. In Munch, that's birth and sex and death. It's really a story about the way that life grows and dies. But it's very specific also about his romantic history here. So let's look at the couple in the middle first of all. Millie Taulov, why this is so critical, this stuff, and maybe you'll have an opinion, I don't know. Millie Taulov, he lost his virginity to in the woods. Let's have a look. This picture is part of a series of 12 paintings. All of the other 11 are in museums in Germany. They were decorations for a very avant-garde theater in Berlin that Munch was commissioned to produce by Max Reinhardt. I need to do a bit of a before and after to talk about Munch's virginity. I hope you'll indulge me. So this is the before. This is an image of Millie Taulov. This is the image of kind of sexual allure. She's presenting herself. She's frontal, right against the picture plane. She's very alluring. This is the before, and this is the after. Those are both images of Munch's virginity. That's what happened. I don't know quite what to ask you about that, other than how you this is how Munch sort of remembered his virginity. This set up his sexual life, those two images.
All right. So this is something I find really interesting. The older woman, she was an older woman. She was
married too. It was an adulterous
older woman. Okay. But he was 22. He wasn't 12 or 15. She didn't lure him into the woods and rape him and tuck him up in the gingerbread house or anything. He was a man. He was 22 and he was losing his virginity, ? Right? The other thing is, apparently he felt really guilty. Why do you think he felt really guilty, Simon?
Because she wasn't a man.
Because she wasn't a man, full stop. Because he'd been fucking with men all his youth and adolescence, everything. And then suddenly he thought, oh God, I've got to start doing it with women and get married. This is what, I better start. Oh, she'll show me the way, this older woman in the forest, And look what she did to him, this femme fatale.
It looks like they had a different experience.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like... and why did he feel so guilty? Why was it so bad? Or let's just say it's all true and he was a virgin and he was 22. Let's say he wanted to marry himself to his art and he didn't want to have an emotional relationship or physical relationship with anything or anybody. He wanted to have his soul completely free and married to his art. Let's say that for Simon's sake, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. He had a real he had this belief, which was very common at the time, that creativity, that his creativity was somehow kind of sacrosanct, and somehow a woman would somehow deplete that, which of course we know is absolute rubbish. And as when we go on to talk about Tuula Larsson, the other lover, I think we'll have plenty to say on that subject. But I think here, what's important to note is that sex is always, in Munch, associated with melancholy, destruction, death. It's all kind of wrapped in the same thing. It's not all, it'd be wonderful if it was all that, but it's not.
Yeah, but and when you really look at her chest and inside and everything, it doesn't, the inside of her doesn't look that attractive, you know? It looks like it looks skeletal, it looks like death, actually, the inside of her. So he was still looking inside the woman, not just the outside, the sexual allure, the lust, that kind of thing. He wanted to know more, and that's what he was interested in. But I still think, and I'm not making jokes about it, because I love Munch. I find him so attractive as well. I always have. But
you told me you wanted to date him at one point.
I can in the next world, as long as he's interested in me. So he might be angry with me. You never know. So
when he hears tonight, he will.
Yeah.
He's watching.
No, I genuinely think I think he definitely had an attraction to men, because of the later paintings and the paintings of men later on. And I don't mean the boys, the Adonises and all of that kind of thing. I mean his friends and the people his neighbour he had fights with and this and that. It seems like there was an emotional thing going on as well. So it's not too far-fetched what I'm saying.
No, absolutely not. So let's see what this does to your narrative. So this is the second of Munch's great romantic relationships. I think she sounds fantastic. If you're going to go fangirl over Edvard Munch, I'm going to do the same over Tuula Larsson, she was called. So Munch's a bit older now. He's in his 30s, mid-30s when he meets Tuula Larsson. She is, she's around 29, and she's a sort of bohemian, she's a writer, she's an artist actually as well, but she's the heiress of a great fortune. I think he was a wine merchant in Oslo. And here they are in 1899, actually looking very much like a sort of married, respectable couple. But their relationship was a seriously tempestuous one, right? I mean, it was really volatile. It was full of kind of sex and emotion. The general dynamic was Munch would run away saying, I can't commit to you, and she would chase him across Europe and discover him hiding in a hotel room in Hamburg, and they'd have sex all night, and then they'd get back together. It's a really kind of volatile, exciting relationship.
Sounds amazing.
And so she inspires, actually, the first version of the Dance of Life. Munch paints in the middle of this thrall, in the thrall of Tuula Larsson. It's also an incredibly traumatic and destabilizing relationship for him. I mean, she pretends, she convinces him to get married. They become engaged, although he later denies it, and she sues him and says, no, we really were engaged and all this stuff. Anyway, within the story, this is the moment there. She's looking jealously on both sides, Tuula at him dancing with Millie Taulov in the center there. That's the good part of their relationship. The denouement, do you want to talk about the denouement? This is the denouement of their relationship, this.
Well, so I don't know how many people know this, but they had this fight, and somehow Munch's finger got shot at the end of the fight. And nobody really, they were very drunk, people heard them shouting and screaming and the gunshot and everything, but nobody ever really knows what happened, whether he was trying to stop her from shooting him, whether he was pulling the trigger, whether he shot himself, but it was enough to end the relationship, definitely.
He never saw her again. Right?
No.
There were lots of bottles of brandy were discovered at the scene that were empty, and we know that she lured him there by having somebody call him and say that she'd attempted suicide. There were empty bottles of morphine. So he sort of rushes to her bedside. They have this big drinking session, and he ends up shot through the finger, and he has an operation there, loses the knuckle on his left hand, and so he wears a sheath for the rest of his life.
Yeah,
so,
and in fortune telling, if you with palm reading, as you go on in your life, your hand changes. So for example, if you get a big scar here, then that will change your destiny of what's happening, which it probably will, because how did you get the scar in the first place? And when something happens to your fingers, so for example, the Pope, when he was shot, he lost the end of his finger, and that was the finger of direction. So Munch, this would have been his subconscious, this would have been about his, I don't know what that finger is actually, but if you understand what I mean, everything would have changed for him after that. And it did, didn't it?
Well, it did. I mean, but his argument to Tulla, I think they were deeply in love personally. His argument to her was that he couldn't commit to a dependent relationship because he had to give everything to his art. That was his kind of belief. I think the truth is probably also to do with the sense of loss and attachment from his childhood. He brought a lot of trauma with him. But this is what he told her anyway, that his children, his paintings were his children, and committing to a relationship would somehow mean compromising that art. The irony is that the absolute opposite was true, and that Tulla Larsson inspired, as a simple look at that picture shows, some of the very best art that he ever produced.
But I want to say something here. So you've got the two Tullas. One is white, one is black, one is good, one is evil, one is this, one is that. She could have been, quite easily, she could have been bipolar or something. There could have
I think he was too, wasn't he?
Yeah, but also the amount of drugs that he took and drink that he did and everything, he was off his face for the first half of his life completely, almost every day. It was like a known thing. And then he decided to go and clean up completely and change his life, which is interesting to do with the finger. That's what I was saying. He really changed dramatically. And his work changed as well, but you have to be a bit of a Munch aficionado to know that, because he was always constantly going back to old subjects, reworking, rethinking, reanalyzing, which is kind of interesting in itself. But this is really interesting because the Tulla character looks very beautiful, and she's just looking on wistfully, waiting.
But here, so this is during the relationship, right? That's when they're together. This is 1906, as Tracey's saying, re-mythologizing, going back to that subject. At the moment, this is 1906-07, when he's maximum psychotic, right? This is when he's the maximum level of his addiction. Just after painting this picture, he checks into a clinic in Copenhagen for a year. He doesn't paint very much, but he gets cleaned out. He has a bunch of therapy and things, and his work forever changes. So this is the moment of just before that happens. And you can see that Tulla has changed from being life and death, marriage and the devil and whatever else this is, to here, she's become this frontal figure there, which is very much, it feels like a sort of haunting image of death on the right there. Ironically, after he broke up with Tulla in 1902, this day, when the finger gets shot, he gets more obsessed with her than ever, and she continues to inspire really great pictures. This is one that I've always found this really powerful. This is a portrait from 1905, split up with her 3 years ago. His finger's just about mended, and he saws the painting in half. The reason there's a black line down the middle is Munch sawed that in half. In the Munch Museum, you can see it. But what do you make of this one? Like
Yeah, this is the jealousy series, isn't it? It's like the green, the jealousy, Well, she looks old and unhappy, and he looks angry, and it's also about jealousy. And also, so there's this constant paintings of Munch's where a woman is having a miscarriage, a woman is having an abortion, a woman is crying, a woman has had an abortion, and he has his arms wrapped around her and everything. So it must have been her. It must have been Tulla. He doesn't actually say who, but it must have been her. So I think probably some of the guilt or some of the remorse or something would be him looking back on that occurrence and that happening, and about her, how she felt. And I think that definitely there was something to do with an abortion and miscarriage.
That's really interesting, because there's a lot of blood in Munch, right?
Yeah.
And particularly at this moment. And so I'm going to lead on from this to this image, which is a couple of years later. This is 1907, the same time as the painting on the wall there. And this is a Munch going back again over the relationship with Tulla and casting the relationship between the two of them in the light of David's great French revolutionary picture, The Death of Marat, of the revolutionary martyr there. And what he's done is painted, you can see Tulla there in all her red-headed glory, and she's killed him. He's lying dead on the bed, and there's lots of blood. Actually, can I just give a slight digression here, because one thing that Munch is never given credit for is his great sense of humor. It's a very funny, kind of sardonic, dark humor. You know what he said about this picture? He wrote to Cassira, his dealer in Berlin, and said, "I painted a really great still life of fruit today, oranges and apples, and it's as good as anything that Cézanne could have done, but I tell you what, the only difference is mine has a murderess and her bleeding victim behind it."
Yeah, because
Classic Munch.
I don't want to deviate, but Munch was really looking at everything that was happening in France with a sort of little bit of kind of envy and a kind of, oh, how come that's so good? And like he even, because I've been through all of it, me and Harry, who works with me, when I had sort of like open access all areas, didn't I, the Munch Museum, and one week I saw 800 Munch paintings on racks, pulling them out like this, and it was really incredible because you go, that was his Matisse face. Oh dear, I'm not sure about that Chagall moment, or whatever it is, it didn't really matter. And we could see all these other references to other artists that he must have at some point been looking at and thinking about, and they were the worst of his paintings, most definitely. So it's interesting. But yeah, he was, with the Cézanne, he was definitely looking and paying attention to what was going on everywhere in Europe. He was, and also Munch was one of the first people in Norway to have a telephone.
He was a real technology buff, right? He had everything, the latest. Yeah.
The latest of everything. The first person to have a Ford motor car, the first person to have this, the first person to have that. He loved technology. So this idea about Munch being this sort of woolly, wild person running across, fields or whatever, is not, fur and stuff, is not true. He had the best tailor-made suits. He had really beautiful handmade, beautiful shoes. He had the best of everything. And he was incredibly, into every kind of technology, the latest camera and paint, the latest colours of tubes of paint. And like, if you look at the colours in this, it's now even, it's so vibrant and so alive. And he used lots of Daguerre colours, he used lime green, he used shocking pinks, everything. Nobody was using those colours then, nobody at all. So he was really advanced and always thinking, like, pushing himself.
And that's so true. And it's one of the, we were talking earlier about this idea that Munch doesn't really get the credit for the importance that he has within the history of modern art. I mean, there's no Fauvism, there's no Matisse without Munch, there's no German expressionism, the Blaureiter and Die Brücke, there's no Vienna and Schiele and all of these. Munch was tremendously influential in so many ways that perhaps we don't see today for one very important reason, which is that most of the Munchs are in Norway. He's very, very underrepresented, I think. There's only one in the UK. There's a few in America. There's one in Boston, one in the Getty, one in Chicago, but there are very, very few Munchs, so people don't see them. Unless you go to Norway and also to Bergen, actually, it's hard to understand why Munch is quite as important as he is.
Yeah, and also Munch, like a lot of American people, thought that the Scream was a cartoon. They didn't realise it was a real painting and actually had gravitas or whatever. A lot of people think the Scream is a really huge painting, and then you see it's very small, the Scream. And Munch had, he's a gentle soul within terms of art. He wasn't an aggressive macho bully at all. And also it's like with Picasso, I'm going to get really in trouble for saying this. I love Picasso, I love his work, but I had this argument with these people. I said, it's not hard to get ahead if you treat half the world like shit, i.e. women. So, and I know Picasso loved women, he loved the women he was with, and he had great love affairs and everything, but as on the whole, Picasso moved women like this throughout his life. Munch didn't do that. Munch treated women with a lot of respect and a lot of equality in lots of ways.
Well, so on that note, let's come back to this picture, if we can, Tracey. Just to say that this reminds me that women are strong, typically, when he paints, and men are weak. He generally, does he paint any strong men? I mean, the real sort of power in his art seems to be the women, doesn't it?
Yeah, but also the other thing is about, because with this painting, what I really love is his hands reaching out to try and touch her. It's almost trying to touch her, and she's just looking at us. She doesn't give a damn what's happened. She has no emotion, she has no feeling. She's just completely cold, numb to the situation. Whereas even though he's dead, he's still trying to touch her, even after death, even after she's killed him. He still loves her, he still wants her. And I think with Munch, that's how he continuously was in his life, whether it was chasing the next painting, chasing the next... He had this want thing about him. But he couldn't have it, and I think this painting is about that.
So around 1900, I'm sure many of us know there's a lot of rethinking of ideas of gender and new models of femininity and masculinity at that time that Munch very much plays with. I think the idea of the decadent man, the sort of the emasculated figure the relentless female figure, the harpy, the virago, the vampire, the Lilith, La Belle Dame sans merci, all of these kind of 1890s symbolist literary things he plays with. And I like this one in particular, the vampire, which he comes back and back to this composition, because it seems to encode, like you're saying about women, the ambiguity there. I don't know what you see. Well, let me ask you, what do you see in this picture? What's going on there?
Well, what I see that's going on is not what was supposed to be going on. I see this as somebody cradling and protecting. I don't see someone tucking into someone's neck and sucking a load of blood out. I see something completely different.
Well, and that's actually what Munch late in life, he agreed, it was painted as a tender embrace between a loving couple. But friends of his saw it and said, that's amazing, she's sucking the blood out of his neck and her hair is running like blood streaming over his head. It's a vampire, and Munch being Munch, who was a great self-publicist, and another thing he doesn't get credit for, incredible sense of his own self-image and marketing, he said, you know what, that's pretty cool, vampire. Okay, let's call it vampire.
Because vampires were really trendy
right, exactly.
then, it was like the idea of Dracula, the vampire, everything, it was like really new and fashionable. So Munch loved new, trendy, fashionable things. So, yeah.
But it comes back to that sense of paradox and duality and ambiguity that's at the very heart of Munch, that it's both. Life is birth and sex and death. It's all those things. It's happiness and it's sadness. It's a kind of really complex.
And years ago, 25 years, 30 years ago, I used to have this little old laundrette on Waterloo Road, and it used to be the Tracey Emin Museum, the perfect place to grow. And I used to just work there, and it was like my studio, but people could come and talk to me, whatever. And one day I had a knock on the door, and there was this really nice man, and he said he wanted to know why I thought Munch was homosexual. So I said, and I gave him all these reasons, and he said, well, there is some truth there, but it isn't that he was homosexual, but the woman he was in love with was a lesbian, and she was my grandmother. And then he proceeded, and he said that he was twins, they were twins, him and his sister, and told me this whole story with lots of facts, lots of information, everything. And then he went away, and I never saw him again. So
you didn't get his number?
No, I didn't know nothing. Well, I think I probably did at the time. We're talking about 30 years ago. But and then this was the other thing in Oslo, when I kept saying to people, yeah, but Munch had children. Everyone goes, no, Munch never had children. Never had children. Never had children. So I think there is some things about Munch that we still don't know, probably.
Nobody's ever claimed to be, have they, a child of Munch?
I don't know. Carrie would know, yeah. There have been, yeah.
Did they? Were there any people?
Yeah, I don't know. They were taking some tests. It was Edvard Munch. I suppose Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of strange, like Munch had this relationship with these two women who were gay, and
She was actually English as well, wasn't
yeah,
she? Even though she was
openly gay. Yeah, because the person who came to see me was English.
yeah. But she took the stage name of Eva Munch.
Yeah.
She was a musician.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's all of these things that cross over are kind of interesting because and also. I wanted to say this, the idea of going to Hamburg and being chased across Europe and then having sex, for 48 hours.
In Hamburg, can you imagine?
Yeah, but in 1902, if you did that now, it would be quite shocking. Do you know what I mean? They were really promiscuously open and driven and didn't care. Tula Larsen didn't care about losing her virginity and someone else might not want her or whatever. She come from a really rich, posh family, but she didn't care what anyone thought of her. He didn't care. There was this kind of decadence and openness was kind of really sort of really freeing for that time. It was kind of shocking.
Well, and in particular in Scandinavia, I mean, the Nordic countries where kind of dawning feminism was women get the vote in Norway in 1913. It's one of the first countries to get there. But at the time, the 1890s, the early 20th century, there's a whole lot of discourse about gender equality and women's rights and so on, and very much within the cultural elite that Munch is part of. And so that's what I wanted to go on to. Actually, that's a neat segue, because I think while it's true that Munch is very much playing with these stereotypes and archetypes of vampires and harpies and what have you, he's also, if we go to this one. And you made a similar point earlier. He paints real women, as well as woman, this kind of the concept, the abstract concept of woman, which is something the male imagination created, all of those vampires and things, they're male products of the imagination. He also paints women, real women who are different and confident and powerful. And this one, the Madonna, the last image I wanted to put on the screen, I wanted to show for a couple of reasons. Not least, it's one of the sexiest paintings. Great painter of sex. This is probably the greatest painting of sex in modern art, I think. But I think it shows a sexually confident, liberated, strong woman rather than a stereotype.
Yeah, definitely. As a real woman, she's really sexy. She looks really good. But it's not belittling her in any way. It's actually showing her strengths and her beauty. So and that's what I was saying about how Munch was not sexist, he was not misogynistic. He didn't treat women badly. There was no little women in his work anywhere. There were big women, strong women. Even the girls were strong. Even the girls were on a journey. Even the girls knew something that other people didn't, like Three Girls on a Bridge or whatever. There's always this strength behind it all.
And they're real. He painted... Yes, he could be guilty of painting a stereotype, but he painted colleagues and family members and friends and lovers and all sorts of different... The women are not kind of boxed into roles, it feels like, with them. They're looked at as individuals.
Yeah, and even when he did all his portraits of all the wealthy people and all the industrialists, and I really love that connection with Andy Warhol, actually. I'd love to have a show of Munch's industrialists and Andy Warhol's as well, anyway. But Munch painted lots of women too, really strong women. It wasn't just all these big men with cigars going, with troubadours on. He painted all these, strong women of culture, women who had a lot of gravitas and a lot of social, and he treated women the same way as he treated men.
So what do you think of Madonna? I mean, what's your take on this image?
Okay, so when I was at Maidstone College of Art in 1986, 1985, I did my art thesis on Munch. And my grade was I only got a 2-2, and it said if Tracey had spent longer than a week on this, she would have got a first. But actually what they didn't know was I just stayed up all night on the night ferry coming back from Amsterdam writing it and handed it in the next day. So I had no books, I didn't have any reference, all I had was the English dictionary. And what I did was I analysed Munch's paintings from the English dictionary, which was very clever, and as in Madonna, Madonnaurous, mad and onerous. So I actually looked at this as being mad and onerous, and how he felt towards the woman with those words. Not bad, actually, considering I was on an all-night ferry. All-night ferry drunk coming back from Amsterdam, you know. But so I always thought that Munch, with all his paintings, he's putting something of him. It's really how he feels about that person. It isn't about how that person looks. It's not a portrait. It's about a connection of how he feels, how he's connected with them. And that's what makes this so beautiful and makes her so sexy and makes her so, she's like otherworldly completely, but she was a real person. And it doesn't seem like much now, but at that time, that would have been totally shocking for people to
Incredibly.
see.
And calling it Madonna as well,
Yeah,
which
that would have been,
the idea this is a sacred image of like female orgasm. This is just would have been a terribly shocking thing that
it would have been.
He would have enjoyed.
Yeah, and he would have been, but Scandinavia was much more open and more liberal. I mean, if he'd have done this in Italy, he would have been...
Amsterdam, maybe, I suppose.
Yeah, Amsterdam, yeah.
Well, so you connected, when you were at Maidstone, you connected with Munch really early on, and you identified with him. Because
totally.
I'd like to move on to just to look at the fantastic quote behind us from 2002, I think it's in my head, of Tracey's, which we'll be presenting at Sotheby's next week too. What was it in Munch that inspired your own practice, has done over the years?
It was so brilliant with Munch. I've always had this weird thing of being lonely or feeling, believe it or not, somehow on the outside. And when I went to Maidstone College of Art, I got in by a fluke. I didn't have any A-levels or O-levels or foundation, nothing. I got in purely on my work. And when I got there, it was a shock for me because everybody was so different. And my love of Munch helped me in my first year so much, because it was like I had a friend. Every single book on Munch that I had and every image I looked at spoke to me. And he was like humanizing everything to do with art. So when I was at Maidstone, I left school at 13, by the way. So when I was at Maidstone, everything seemed like over-intellectualized for me, and it was hard for me to grasp, and I had no knowledge of art history or anything. So Munch cut through all of that. Everybody understands what it is to be jealous. Everybody understands what fear is. Everybody understands what it is to love. And I totally related to that. And I have carried that through with my work, regardless of fashion, regardless of anything. Like back in the 90s when everybody was polishing perspex, you know, I was doing stuff like this. I wasn't painting like I am now because there really wasn't room for that, but there was definitely room for me to express myself emotionally. And I was accused of screaming at the time or being narcissistic. And then if you think now, I was a woman saying, this is how it feels to be a woman. And I was vocal and I was clear about it, whether I was talking about rape, hurt, pain, abortion, whatever. You think abortion. You know, I was making work about abortion 30 years ago, saying people don't understand what it is for a woman to have an abortion. This is how it feels. And I was completely derided and put down for that. And my work was not shown. Oh, I wonder why, you know? Whereas now, I think that there's a really big rise in people wanting to grasp emotions within art, wanting art to touch them, wanting to feel something. We're heading so fast into the age of determinism in the worst possible way that we possibly can, that emotions and feelings they're so important that we have to keep them and we have to look after them and we have to express them and not be afraid about it. Now is the time for Munch. Munch is rearing up and he is coming and coming and coming. Now is his moment because people can relate to it and people go, yeah, he was jealous or he loved or he hated or he feared. It's okay to have those emotions. So. And
what I mean, he like you was criticised for overexposing, for oversharing, but for him, I think the painting it was certainly cathartic for himself to really, you know, dig into his emotions and try and understand what was happening. But he also talked about how he wanted his art to be therapeutic for other people. I think that's the point, is that it makes people feel less alone, that these things have been felt before, these very difficult, very emotional subjects. We all live that, and we need to be openly able to express it.
Yeah, I was on the what's it called, the News at 10 or whatever with Emily, and there was a section of women, and we were discussing something to do with women, and at the end of it, they were talking about the fact that we have to pay tax on sanitary products and everything, and my last words were, well, we all bleed. And the next day across all the newspapers it says, Tracey Emin says, we all bleed. We all bleed. But Munch bled openly. I bleed openly. And someone has to do it. So it's like a vortex, like a voice, like an expression. Because otherwise, if we don't, society just all gets fucked up and bunged up. And then we have the worst things happening ever. If everyone, all of us, could just relieve our emotion and bleed a little bit more, the world would be a much kinder, safer, gentler place. Because we'd be able to express. And like this, you know, people feel like this. It's okay to feel like this. It's all right. It's okay to love and desire somebody and be afraid of it. It's okay. It's all right. And that is the purpose for me of what art does and what it did for Munch and why I relate to him. And I'm not ashamed of it. Whereas I think there's certain aspects of art history or periods of history where you were supposed to be kind of cooler than cool, but I'm not cool. Munch wasn't cool. Well, we are in a weird way. Yeah, he was. Yeah. No, but I mean, he didn't try to hide anything. He didn't try to.
He was cool and hot. It was like both,
really
both, and
hot.
gay, apparently.
Yeah, and gay. Yeah, no, he served everyone. Munch just said, "I love you all." Yeah.
But I love what you just said, and it reminds me that Munch said in a very pithy way, a beautiful summary of what you just said, where he said, "Art is our life's blood." Right? Literally, these paintings they're bled out of him. Right? That he uses that, putting himself out there in an incredibly kind of vulnerable way that I think we can learn a lot from. Tracey, we can talk for hours, I'm sure, but I appreciate that the audience here may wish to ask the odd question of you. So I suggest we open the floor, and if anybody has a question for Tracey that they'd like her to address, please shout.
Question for Tracey. If Edvard was sitting next to you right now, what would you ask him?
Seriously?
Yeah, anything.
It doesn't matter how old he was or how young. Not too young, actually, but I don't care. I'd ask him if he'd come out to dinner with me tonight. That's really, really what I'd ask. I'd just love to spend time with him and ask him about a million questions.
Where would you go?
My house. I would seriously want to know more about him, everything. The things that we've talked about tonight, I'd ask him more questions about that. And I'd also ask him lots of questions about painting and his painting. I'd ask him when he painted outside, what time, how far in the year did he take it before he got too cold or before his hands got cold? I'd ask him when he stopped drinking and taking drugs and everything. Did he feel that it affected his work? I'd have so many questions to ask him, Matthew. So there.
Great.
Yeah.
Another question?
An incredible talk. Thank you both very much. My question is to do with how he was feeling towards the end of his life and what sort of work was he creating in his final years.
Well, he's one of the great painters of aging. The aging process, I think, right? Isn't he?
Yeah. When he died in his house, like Simon will, it doesn't matter if I get the numbers wrong, they found over 500 paintings, 5,000 drawings, something like, I don't know, 5,000 watercolours, whatever. And apparently in every single drawer, in every cupboard, there was just works and works and works. He was prolific and carried on working right to the very end. And one of my favourite paintings of his is Between the Bed and the Clock. And that series of paintings, when he was an old man, like 20 years ago, you couldn't give them away. And now they're the paintings that are some of the most sought after the great classic subject matters. But these paintings that he did about his fragility and his old age are so beautiful, are so lovely and so endearing. That he was a fantastic artist right up until the very end. He carried on working.
He did, yes. Some of those, like that picture's right at the end, isn't
Yeah.
it? And he's sort of really uncompromising in the way that he paints himself, literally, decomposing almost. You see him right to the end, being incredibly honest. Well, maybe I should round up, if there aren't any more questions, just by saying, first of all, thank you, Tracey, for your incredibly insightful comments. Nobody speaks about Munch like Tracey Emin, and I think Munch would be incredibly proud hearing you speak and looking at where that went, the incredible power of painting emotional truth, creating art within emotional truth. And we need little further proof, I think, than the fact that Munch seems, unlike a lot of artists who seem less and less relevant with kind of passing time, Munch to me seems more and more relevant passing time. It's just been a show at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, which has just closed. It got the highest entry for any museum ever at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, more than Picasso. I think that tells us, Munch is urgently needed by this world. And if there's a reason that is, it's because what Munch is about, like Tracey, is the real stuff of life, the real kind of the nitty-gritty, the emotional, the hard stuff that we all go through. And across the centuries, he was born 100 years before you, 100 years later.
Yeah, he was born in 1863. I was born in 1963. But one quick thing, when I was doing the show in Oslo and in the Royal Academy, all Munch's paintings arrived not in frames, just with trays. And my paintings just have trays round. And Munch's paintings looked like they were painted yesterday. They were so full of life, looked so young, looked so amazing. I would love to see a show of Munch's work without the frames, because I'm telling you, nobody would believe these paintings were done like 100 years ago. It's impossible.
Yeah. Exactly, and I think that the painting here, Dance on the Beach, which we'll be selling next week, it just bears out that point. This is a painting that could have been painted any time in the past 100 years, really, that picture, couldn't it? It feels so powerful and contemporary and timeless. Tracey Emin, thank you very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure.